Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Moreau for Kozile Call. As I indicated yesterday, we're going to talk about Freemen today. So we're gonna have three different approaches. I'm gonna read a paper I wrote 30 years ago during my political science degree at FIU. It's a paper I wrote 30 years ago. I'm going to read it, and then we're going to go over the different types of freedom that we have. And I'm going to compare absolute freedom with relative freedom. So we have absolute, we have relative, and we have radical. So I'll do a comparison between the three. So before that, as always, I'm going to do some invite. I'm going to invite a few people, and then I'll get started. Couple more people. All right, so this afternoon we're going to talk about freemen. What does it mean to be free? I'm going to take a look at the difference between absolute freedom, radical freedom, relative freedom. And I'm also going to talk about the different types of other types of freedom that we have. And first, before I continue, I'm going to read a paper that I wrote 30 years ago while doing my political science degree at FIU. So in the post-Civil War South, life for the freedmen was an immense threshold. There were no more slaves, but the plantation owners and the rich controlled them as if their freedom had no importance. In no part of the South was the struggle over, the meaning of free labor more sustained than in the South Carolina Low Country. There, the greatest density of slaves had been found. There, distinctive and rich traditions of Afro-American economic and community life had developed. Hundreds of black men had entered the Union Army. There, by order of Union General William T. Sherman, freed people had taken possession of thousands of acres of plantation land. And there, the wealthiest and most aristocratic members of the Southern master class had resided. Bargaining with ex-slaves in the marketplace seemed unimaginable. Like masters and lords in other servile societies, most Southern planters saw their dependents as lazy, irresponsible, unreliable, and wholly incapable of performing the task necessary to commercialize agriculture without compulsion. The question was then asked, can the freed Negroes be made a useful and efficient peasantry? The Negro labor upon the plantation could not be controlled. Planters appeared to be willing to make contracts with their own slaves. White contractors tried to cultivate the crops with hired Negro labor, and freedmen tried to cultivate them for themselves. Cultivation was very bad. The cotton was uneven and broken. Much of that was due to the ignorance of the cultivation of the crops and ignorance of the climate and of the soil. Doubtless, the irregularity and uncertainty of the system of labor was the greater part of the default. The Negroes will not work regularly and systematically. They employed work as they pleased, do not work on Saturdays, and visit the neighboring cities and plantations as they please. The demand of workers required to plant 30 hands was done by 10. Therefore, certain failure was expected. The independent Negro farmers' condition is even worse than the contractors because the latter secured the best lands. Many of the Negroes had a small patch here and there of cotton, corn, and potatoes. Almost universally, these crops will not support those who are cultivating them. Those parents who had their sons in the army expected to receive part of their pay. The Negro's labor cannot be calculated upon with certainty from one day to another. He exists and lives from day to day without plans for the future. To expect any kind of prosperity, Pope, a planter on the Sea Islands, continued to argue the lands must be restored. The valuable cotton and provision lands entirely occupied by freed Negroes are groaning under mismanagement. The greater number of Negroes should all be sent back to the states or communities where they belong. The freed Negro must be submitted to a permit system, as in the army, where obedience is necessary to success. Doing this will prevent vagrancy and hold him to his engagements to labor. It is the ignorance, the prejudice, the brutality, and the educated idleness that are mainly to be watched and placed under restraint. Where there are only two classes, the one educated and the other intelligent, and the other ignorant and degraded, it is preferable if one class must govern that it is the former, the one that's educated and intelligent. Were the freedmen to receive more, the retaliation between capital and labor will be disturbed. If he can have his own little garden and a stock of poultry and pigs, he's fortunate. The tension existed in the South among the races was well justified. For example, after more than 24 years of imprisonment for denouncing apartheid in his country, Nelson Mandela was the president, became president. The white race in the South did not want the black men to succeed as a free people. As the documents prove, the whites did everything they could to suppress the freemen. In turn, the freemen had to appeal to the president of these United States to ensure that they receive their fair share of the land. So now we're going to look at the different types of freedoms that we have. We have political freedom, we have personal freedom, we have intellectual freedom, we have economic freedom, spiritual freedom. And there are some other important freedoms that freedom from fear, freedom from want, civil liberties, and location freedom. So what is political freedom? So political freedom refers to the ability of citizens to participate in the political process, including voting, holding office, and expressing political opinions. That is political freedom. What is personal freedom? So personal freedom encompasses the freedom to make personal choices about one's life, including lifestyle, relationships, and beliefs. That's personal freedom. What about intellectual freedom? Intellectual freedom involves the freedom to think, learn, and express oneself without censorship or limitations. Economic freedom. Economic freedom refers to the ability to engage in economic activities such as owning property, starting a business, and making economic choices. Spiritual freedom. Spiritual freedom involves the freedom to choose and practice one's own belief and spiritual path. Freedom from fear. This is the absence of fear of persecution, violence, or other threats. Freedom from want. Freedom from want is the ability to meet basic needs for food, shelter, and health care. Civil liberties. So civil liberties are fundamental rights and freedoms that protect individuals from government overreach, such as freedom of speech, religion, and assembly. What about freedom of location? Freedom of location is the ability to live and work in different locations, often associated with remote work. So now I'd like to take a look at what is relative freedom, what is absolute freedom, and what is radical freedom. So relative freedom refers to the idea that freedom exists within certain limits or constraints, rather than as an absolute, unlimited state. Relative freedom acknowledges that individuals or entities have choices and options, but these choices are bounded by various factors like physical laws, societal norms, personal limitations, or knowledge gaps. So this is really a breakdown of all these concepts. So it's not, relative freedom is not absolute. Unlike the concept of absolute freedom, which implies no limitations whatsoever, relative freedom recognizes that some constraints are always present. Individuals or systems with relative freedom can make choices within a defined range of possibilities. The extent of relative freedom depends on the specific context, such as the environment, the rules in place, or the individual's capabilities. The concept of relative freedom can imply to both conscious beings making choices and to systems operating according to natural laws. In essence, relative freedom acknowledges that while we might have the ability to choose, the scope of those choices is always shaped by factors beyond our complete control. What about radical freedom? So according to this French philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, the idea, radical freedom is the idea that people have absolute freedom to make choices and define their own meaning in life. It suggests, radical freedom suggests that humans are not bound by external circumstances or predetermined paths, but are fully responsible for their actions or consequences. So what is absolute choice? People can act radically free at any time, even if laws, morals, or powers seem to prevent it. So if you're looking at radical freedom, do we really have radical freedom? So if you want to adopt that concept of radical freedom, then you will end up getting in trouble, because radical freedom suggests that humans are not bound by external circumstances or predetermined path. They are fully responsible for their actions or consequences. So it's also the idea people have absolute freedom to make choices and define their own meaning in life. So do we have the freedom to make choices, our own choices? Absolute freedom, because it's an absolute choice. Absolute choice again means that people can act radically free at any time, even if laws, morals, or powers seem to prevent it. So if you have a law that prevents you from acting radically free, and you violate those laws, then of course you're gonna get in trouble, and of course you will or may end up going to jail, or may even getting killed, because you're not supposed to violate laws set by society. So that's why we have, instead of having absolute freedom, instead of having radical freedom, we have relative freedom, because we are bound by societal norms, we are bound by morals, and we are bound by powers that society set for us. So we have relative freedom and not absolute freedom, and not ever radical freedom. And of course, those people who get in trouble are people who think they have radical freedom, and when you violate these laws, you get in trouble. So I wanted to go over this with you guys today. I was excited about my paper that I wrote 30 years ago, and it was about freemen in the South. And while they were free, they could not get together. They could not cultivate the land like the owners did. And you could be free, but that doesn't mean you can enjoy that freedom. That doesn't mean you know what to do with that freedom. And that exactly what happened with our Negroes back in the days when they became free. They were unable to cultivate the land as they were supposed to. They refused to work on Saturdays. They were partying. They were visiting the other towns nearby, instead of focusing on the work at hand, which was to cultivate the land so they could provide for the family. So once again, this was Dr. Moreau for Cause de l'École. I'm always happy to be with you guys on Sunday. So I will see you guys again next Sunday for another Cause de l'École. I wish you a great Sunday, a great week. Be blessed, pray, and say thank you to God.